The holidays are filled with family get-togethers. In case of unexpected guests, this dish can be made days ahead and can be kept at room temperature indefinitely. It's the national dish of this South American country and can be made with almost any type of protein. Its other main ingredient is a natural antiseptic, and this dish is usually served with a bread shaped like braided hair. We're looking into the history and origins of Pepperpot. I'm your host, Glenn Warren, and welcome to another serving of Seasons Eatings, the podcast which explores the history and origins of your favorite Christmas foods. Seasons Eatings can be found wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Seasons Eatings can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Blue Sky. If you love the show, then I humbly ask you to share this podcast with someone you think would love to hear more about the history of Christmas and the foods which shape the holiday we love so much. And if you want to give me suggestions for a future episode, just email me at seasonseatingspodcast@gmail.com. All the links can be found in the show notes at seasonseatingspodcast.com. Guyanese cuisine is as diverse as its people, an amalgamation of Amerindian, African, Indian, and European influences. This is evident in this combination of meats, peppers, vegetables, and cassava. Pepperpot is a dish popular in Guyana. It's traditionally served at Christmas and other special events. Along with chicken curry and cook-up rice, Pepperpot is one of Guyana's national dishes. The history of Pepperpot in the Guyanese Christmas is difficult to uncover. We can say with certainty that the dish had its beginnings with the indigenous peoples of the land that eventually became Guyana. The peoples living at the time separately discovered the amazing preservative properties of liquid extracts from the poisonous bitter cassava root. Other people discovered the liquid which is called kada or karakura sauce. This sauce is used to make the dish known as tumapot. On the other hand, the Arawaks discovered the liquid we now call cassarip, made from the cassava plant. Pepperpot is usually reserved for special occasions because it needs to cook for several hours. And special occasions like Christmas and New Year's, you usually have time off from work, so you can spend time needed to cook the stew. That's why it's mostly eaten on Christmas Day or during the Christmas holiday season, and sometimes even on Boxing Day or the week after. Traditionally, the dish is made using wiri wiri chili peppers. That's a capsicum cultivar native to Guyana. But due to low availability outside the country, you can use a Scotch bonnet pepper or a habanero pepper, and they're commonly accepted as substitutes due to their similar spice level and fruitiness. Pepperpot is defined in large part by the inclusion of the cassarip. That's a thick black liquid that has the same consistency as molasses and is made from the bitter juices of the cassava root. The process of making cassarip involves grating the poisonous and bitter cassava root, then stuffing it into a flexible cylindrical basket called a matapi. Then all the juices of the grated cassava are squeezed out into a container or a bucket, which are then carefully boiled to both deactivate the poison and to reduce the juices to a thick black syrup. Cassarip is found in practically every Guyanese home, where it's used as a browning agent to preserve or prepare many different dishes, such as stews. You can find cassarip in any West Indian grocer, so you don't have to go through the process of making it yourself if you don't want to. And cassarip is highly shelf-stable, able to be kept for many years without spoiling. Some people would always joke that Cassaripe was kept for donkey's years, which is a British way of saying a very long time. And the large pot of Pepperpot also tends to be left out at room temperature, because often on the stove for weeks without going to waste. To avoid spoilage, Guyanese home cooks reheat the Pepperpot a couple times each day, morning and evening, until the last bowlful is eaten, to kill off any microorganisms that might be beginning to establish themselves. And I always found that with a stew, the longer the stew sits and it's warmed over and over, it tastes better over time because the flavors have a chance to meld. The process of making Pepperpot generally takes at least a few hours to cook, depending on your choice of meat. Traditionally, beef, pork, or mutton, which is sheep, are sometimes the more popular meats for making Pepperpot, although you have many other options. Some people use a combination of oxtail, beef, and cow foot. Because cow foot is actually rich in collagen, the heel and popular inclusions, they rich or thicken the stew as their naturally high levels of collagen melt into gelatin. And again, that's where we get a lot of our gelatin packets from, boiled down feet of cow or pig. The taste of Pepperpot itself is more on the sweeter side, but it does have a balance between sweet and savory. Obviously, the boiled down cassava, like I said, is molasses-like, so it kind of have this sort of savory-sweet combination. And this dish is unlike any other in the world. And as the name implies, Pepperpot is also spicy. Now, every person prepares spices and heat level to their personal preference. So as I said before, Wiri Wiri pepper is the Guyanese chili pepper and is one of the main peppers used in Guyana. It's a small, round pepper that is spicy and unique in smell, and for most Guyanese, this is what's added to the Pepperpot for the heat. So if you don't have that on hand, as I said before, you can add a habanero pepper or even a Scotch bonnet pepper, or even if you want to test yourself, you can go with a ghost chili pepper. Of course, the star ingredient in Pepperpot is meat, typically beef, but some versions even include wild game like deer or laba, which is a local rodent, or even fish. And the meat is slow cooked until tender in a savory broth. Some South American cuisines can be a bit, how can I say this, a bit different than North American or even European cuisines. A lot of South American cultures eat rodents. There are some that eat guinea pigs, and laba is another rodent found in Guyana that's been used for centuries as a source of protein. If you know what a capybara is, it's kind of like a large, it is a rodent, as I said before, but labas look the same. They kind of have a very small snout. They're spotted, and they can weigh up to 26 pounds. So they're pretty hefty for a small animal. So it can easily be understood that they would bountiful population would be used for a protein source, especially with indigenous populations. To prepare the meat for the Pepperpot stew, it's usually simmered overnight just to boil off any fat or to render the fat off the meat. But first I'm going to talk about the other main ingredient in Pepperpot, which is the cassaripe. So as I said before, it's a thick black liquid made from cassava root, usually added a few other spices just for flavor. But you take the bitter juice of the cassava root, which is actually poisonous, because it contains a compound called acetone cyanohydrin. So that decomposes or breaks down into a highly toxic hydrogen cyanide on contact with water. So to make cassaripe, the juice is boiled down until it's reduced by about half in volume, through the consistency of molasses and flavored with spices including cloves, cinnamon, salt, a little bit of sugar, and cayenne pepper. And the peculiar quality of cassareep is it works as an antiseptic. It allows food to be kept on the back of the stove, quote, in quotes, for an indefinite length of time, as long as additional cassareep is added every time you add more protein. According to one legend, Betty Maskell of Granada had a pepper pot that was maintained like this for more than a century. Dutch planters in Suriname reportedly had pepper pots in daily use that they kept cooking for many years, as did businessmen's clubs in the Caribbean. And finally, you add a little bit of hot pepper for that signature kick, making Pepperpot that irresistible treat for spice lovers. Now, we'll find out how to make Pepperpot completely and the perfect companion to Pepperpot after the break.
Hello, Christmas lovers and enthusiasts. If you're like me and you're always counting down the days until Christmas, I invite you to listen to Closer to Christmas. Think of the podcast as like a Christmas advent calendar. Each episode that comes out, we get a little bit closer to Christmas, and it's always a surprise as to what the Christmas-related topic will be for that episode. So search for Closer to Christmas on your favorite podcast platform of choice, or head over to anchor.fm/closer to Christmas. Thanks, and I hope to see you there soon.
Don't you wish the holidays would last the entire year? Well, now it can. Head on over to mymerrychristmas.com where you can enjoy the holidays all year long. You can chat with other Christmas enthusiasts on any topic you can think of. Movies, books, cooking, decorating, anything. If it's about Christmas, it's here. Joining My Merry Christmas is completely free. But if you become a Premier member, you can enjoy extra bonuses such as a yearly Christmas card exchange and Kringle Radio, Santa's exclusive Christmas radio station. For only $19.95, you can become a Premier member of mymerrychristmas.com for a full year. So head on over to mymerrychristmas.com and start enjoying Christmas all year long. Having invested the time and aromatic torture of making the Pepperpot, it's imperative that the bread with which the Pepperpot will be eaten be a high standard. That's why the traditional plated bread is a common accompaniment to Pepperpot. A plated loaf tastes best when it's fresh and crispy on the outside and soft as butter in the middle. But this is nothing new. Its inventors had the same idea almost 600 years ago. Guyanese plat bread is a variation on the Swiss bread zof. It's basically a braided, enriched bread dough like challah or brioche, and the only difference is that there's no eggs in a traditional zof dough. According to Swiss bread researcher Max Waren, baking the zof is originated in Bern and is a tradition that's been maintained since 1430. At that time, white flour and the platted loaf made from it were considered luxury goods. For this reason, the loaf was a festive treat and only eaten on special occasions, like during the holiday season. In order to distinguish it also visually from the conventional bread loaves, it was artistically braided. Its origins are fairly unclear, but it's also surrounded by many legends, Some are a bit gloomy and some are a bit cheerful. Apparently, in ancient times, women used to accompany their deceased husbands into the tomb and the spirit world in order for the married couple to be reunited in death. Now, thankfully, that tradition has been abandoned and replaced by a new, less barbarian one. Instead of being forced to perish with her man, the widow only had to cut off her hair, usually plaited, and lay it in the grave alongside the body of her late spouse. Still later, the practice of offering one's hair as a sacrifice was abolished, and braided loaf was used in place of the tresses. But there's no real proof of that custom, so it's more likely that Zuf saw the light of day in a less morbid way. In 1256, the first Bakers' Guild was formed in Basel, Switzerland, and not long after, a few more were formed in various cantons in the Helvetic territory. The Bakers' Guild system was established in medieval Europe to protect the interests of the bakers, regulate the price and weight of bread, and prevent bakers from selling substandard bread. These merchant guilds were formed to monitor not only the quality of the goods, but also better market access. In the cities, bread could only be baked by a member of the guild. The system was a lucrative one for the bakers, even if they practically worked their fingers to the bone, having to knead dough by hand at night. Very little changed over the centuries, although guilds and guild membership certainly did. They eventually crumbled in the 19th century under the wave of the Enlightenment. All that remained was the Bakers' Guild symbol, the pretzel, which has survived in bakery signs and logos. The reason it represents the baker is simple. The knotted bread represents praying arms. During the 15th century, this delicacy became very popular as it used to be given as gifts on special occasions, such as Christmas and New Year. It was even offered as a token of love or to seal a promise or marriage. Since its existence has been corroborated and documented since 1430, it's most probable that it was a Swiss invention. Now, the Swiss continue the tradition of bringing a zolf, or a bread, to their hosts to mark special occasions, such as public holidays and feast days. So when it comes to the physical act of eating the Pepperpot, it's about tearing off a large piece of bread. With this rustic eating, there is no place here for uniformly sliced bread. To eat, torn pieces of the bread are used to mop up the sauce. The crusty ends and bottom crusts are actually my favorite part of the bread. It's a bit more flavorful for me. I like to expose the sauce as wide as a surface area as possible so the bread can easily soak up all that flavor. Another technique is to repeatedly pat the pieces of the bread into the sauce, making them full and almost sopping wet. And then that inevitable moment arrives, the eating. So the soft, sauced bread almost melts in your mouth. A few gentle chews later, and you're ready for the next piece of sauced bread. And it's a process repeated until there's no more sauce on the plate. And of course, if you can't get your hands on a nice plaited loaf, you can also use the freshly baked or store-bought loaf. No one's going to judge you. The method utilized when making Pepperpot depends on which chef one asks. Some boil the meat with the cassareep before adding the water, and some add the cassareep and water after the meat has been boiled. And the chosen spices that are added to the stew vary. The original Pepperpot would have included wild meat, and it still does sometimes. And while it's generally agreed that beef is the meat of choice, even bones are included. You can even throw in chicken or pork. And if you're vegetarian, tofu can be used. There are many variations, and none of them are wrong. One thing, though, that the meat needs to be lean. and therefore probably steamed or boiled to remove most of the fat. So add your meat to a large pot with enough water to come up the sides. In this step, we're going to steam the meat to remove any of the fat. So this is done usually overnight on a low simmer or even just for a few hours. So after the meat has been steamed, discard that liquid in the pot. It's preferable to do that step. Some don't, but it is preferable because you may find that the meat stew has a bit of a rank taste because there are a few sort of impurities that may have escaped from the meat. And then you can just remove the meat from the pot and now add to the pan some onion, some thyme, cinnamon, orange peels, salt, brown sugar, cloves, and the wiri peppers. Saute for 7 to 8 minutes until the onion is a nice golden brown. Pour in a cup of hot water, scraping the bottom to deglaze all the lower bits, the brown bits known as the fond on the pot. And of course, don't skip this step. That's where a lot of the flavor is in the vegetables. It'll add an extra layer of flavor to the dish. Add the meat to the pot and then pour in the cassareep and saute for another 4 to 5 minutes. And then add about 5 to 6 cups of hot water and bring to a gentle boil. And then reduce the heat to a medium-low and cover. Now you simmer this for at least 3 to 4 hours until that meat is super tender. Then you can set it aside to rest overnight at room temperature. And remember, this is not a big deal for the stew because the cassareep is a natural antiseptic. You don't have to worry about bacterial growth in the stew. Now, this renders off any of the remaining fat from the meat and lets the rich, thick cassareep penetrate and flavor the meat. And as I said, the cassareep helps preserve the meat, and the Pepperpot can be kept at room temperature and reheated once a day for up to a week. Simply bring it to a boil until it's warmed through. And it's this variation on the Pepperpot that marks it as a cultural reflection of Guyana. Just as our preferences vary in terms of Pepperpot and what we put in it and what type of protein, so does the cultural population of Guyana vary. Pepperpot combines the past and the present. It's a reminder that Indigenous people have shared their culture with us. So on Christmas Day, as we dine with Pepperpot, we would do well to reflect on how our differences can make us richer, much like that delicious Pepperpot gravy. I'm Glenn Warren, and thank you for listening to this serving of Seasons Eatings. Seasons Eatings is available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And please, if you can leave a review about the show, we can spread the Christmas cheer. And if you let me know you've left a review, I'll send you a Seasons Eatings sticker as a personal thank you. And I would also love to hear from you. Send me an email at seasonseatingspodcast@gmail.com. Let me know how I'm doing, suggestions for future episodes, or just to chat. And I know that we can all get busy, especially during the holidays. So even sharing the podcast with someone who loves Christmas would be a great help. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can buy me an eggnog. Head on over to seasonseatingspodcast.com, click on the little cup in the corner. Each small donation helps with the daily running of the podcast and is greatly appreciated. All music for Seasons Eatings is used under the Creative Commons license.